All right. So we called on Audible in the middle of the week this week. So I was supposed to preach a final sermon out of Proverbs, but what happened was I realized that the sermon that I wrote was better for another space, for another thing, right? And so I'm going to tell you about that thing. At the end of January, I think it's like the 26th, we're going to do a thing that we're just going to call, because we're not creative, Man Church. Yes. It's just church for dudes on a Friday night. And we're going to talk about guy stuff, like steaks and farting, you know? And football. So the sermon that I wrote that was intended to be for this week, I realized it was mostly just aimed at the guys, so we're just gonna push it off for that. And we'll have more information on that coming up. So we're just gonna dive into the series that we had leading into Christmas, and it's called More Than Enough. Because this time of year can be like, this time of year is fun, but it can also be like just exasperating, like just exhausting and hard, right? Because let's just start with the fact that it gets dark at 4. Today sunset's 4:51, I think. I only know that because hunting, but anyway, like 4:50, that's crazy. And it's depressing, right? And the days just get short, and you got all of that, and then on top of that, you gotta go spend time with your family, which you like really enjoy, but the parts you don't enjoy, you feel guilty about not enjoying, right? I'm thinking the best of you and your family situation and saying that, right? Because some of y'all are just like, I don't wanna go at all, right? You got all of that, plus it's like, hey, $26 for a box of trash bags, but also I have to buy presents. What the heck, right? Not to mention, you're gonna use a lot more trash bags, right? Because you're gonna have people eating in your house. So like all of this stuff, like this time of year is great, and it can be hard too. And one of the things that I find myself, I don't know about you, but like I do the whole like seasonal depression kind of thing where like when the days start getting short, I lose motivation. And I get real like introspective, and everything is existential, right? Like every thought process is just like, what does this mean about my life? You know what I mean? It just, everything kind of gets that way, and it just, it's this time of year. And so the idea here is to just say, he's more than enough for whatever you're facing, right? And so today, the conversation is he's more than enough for my stability. He's more than enough for my stability, right? Because a lot of times, life throws stuff at you, and it just is not, it's not easy all the time, and it can feel crazy some of the time. It can just feel crazy. It can be destabilizing. Right? You have events and you feel like you're just getting pushed around. And the fact of the matter is our faith is supposed to be, our God wants to be more than enough for that stability to exist in our lives, right? And really what it comes down to is us. How do we manage ourselves to allow him to do what he wants to do, right? So we're gonna jump out of Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 29, but I got a bunch of context to get you to where we're gonna go. So let me just start there. This is Matthew 7, 24 to 29 is the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount. So the Sermon on the Mount is it's basically Jesus's manifesto, right? That's a weird word to use, but he lays everything out. And the Sermon on the Mount is written well, not written. The Sermon on the Mount, the things that are highlighted in the Sermon on the Mount are intentional. It's setting up the beginning of Jesus' ministry. It's setting up what's about to come and why Jesus is doing what he's doing. So anybody, when you hear a story, right? The vantage point of the story kind of matters for the context of the story. Does that make sense? So we were at our friend's house yesterday, right? And all of a sudden screaming breaks out from the other room. And it's like, what's going on? Well, it's the playroom, so they have a camera to see what's going on in the playroom, right? And so we watch the video back. So this is what happens. Nora gets mad at this one girl. They're fighting, right? Her friend. She gets mad at her friend. They're fighting. She pushes Nora. Nora starts crying. Big brother grabs the girl who pushed Nora and goes, what did you do? And she goes, don't grab me like that. Whack. Right? So there are 3 principles in this story. First of all, it's the most hilarious video of all time. Nobody was really hurt, just feelings, right? And but there are 3 principles in this story. You have Nora. From Nora's perspective, she pushed me, right? From the other little girl's perspective, she was yelling at me and he grabbed me. And then from his perspective, big brother's perspective, she hit me, right? The perspective of the storyteller matters. And in the case of Matthew, his perspective is he is a Jew. And he wants to show how Jesus is the King of the Jews, how Jesus is the Messiah, the rightful Messiah, through their means, through biblical means, through scriptural means for them, right? And so what he's doing, or what's happening here, right, in the Sermon on the Mount to start out is this. He starts out with the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. This is 5:3 through 12. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Jesus starts with these statements that are like inflammatory. Now, you read them and you're like, they're not inflammatory, they just kind of like seem upside down. Well, that's the first thing, right? Is that Jesus is saying the kingdom of heaven will be like this. He's establishing what his kingdom will look like. He's establishing himself through his speech as the king, right? And ultimately what we know is that he is the king and he is the perfect king. In ancient context, the king was the giver of the law and the fulfiller of the law and the embodiment of the law. The king was supposed to be morally upright. Jesus is the only perfect king. That's what he's establishing here. The second thing that he's doing by saying all this, by saying the social order will be flipped on its head. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Like the social order will be flipped on its head. The second thing he's doing here is he's calling out the Sadducees. The Sadducees were an elite ruling class in this time. There weren't very many of them, but one of them was the high priest. One of them was a chief priest and his family. And these guys, they did not have, they weren't particularly pious, but they were particularly political. And so Jesus is calling them out, saying the social order is gonna be flipped, right? So I am king and this is what it's gonna look like. They're not happy about it. The next thing, 17 through 20. Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. So he's establishing himself as king. And he's also, there's this parallel that's being drawn between him and Moses. Culturally, for the Jews, Moses is King David, right? And Moses, these are the two, right? And really probably Moses. And so what he's doing is he's saying, hey, I'm a descendant of King David, and I am the rightful and perfect king. And not only that, he's mimicking Moses. So unpack this for a minute at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. This is important for Matthew, okay? So both Moses and Jesus are exiled to Egypt, right? Both of them are in Egypt. Moses spent 40 years wandering the desert. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert. Moses had to pass through the Red Sea to find freedom. He had to pass through water, a body of water, which would have been seen as like purifying, right? Jesus was baptized in the Jordan. And Moses received the law on a mountain. And Jesus is about to give the new law on a mountain. There's these parallels and from a literary standpoint, they're important because Matthew is trying to say, this is who this man was. This is who this man is. He's king of the Jews. He is the new lawgiver. He is the Messiah. And from just a nowadays standpoint, right? What that means for us is that by Jesus coming and embodying and fulfilling the law, he met the needs of the old covenant that God had made with Israel. And he fulfilled it by following the whole law, right? And then he was blameless at this point. So then he sacrificed. He dies on the cross. He sacrificed for our sins, which then ushers in a new covenant. That's what Matthew is debuting here as he's unpacking the Sermon on the Mount. After all of this, what happens is he lays out basically more, it's not new morals, it's more stringent morals. It goes from do this, don't do that, to where's your heart? Right? It's, you've heard it said, do not murder, but if you hate someone, you've murdered them in your heart. You don't commit adultery, that's great. But if you look at a woman lustfully, you've committed adultery with her in your heart, right? You go through an eye for an eye, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek. Like a lot of the things, love your enemies. A lot of the things, the Lord's Prayer's in here. A lot of the things that we go back to, they're foundational for our Christian beliefs. It's right here. It's right here in the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus, here's the one other thing. Lost it. It was a cool song though. Totally lost what I was thinking. So, it's cool. It doesn't take much, all right? I have 3 kids in my house and I can't focus on nothing. I remember. The other thing about the Sermon on the Mount is it was intentionally written in such a way, right? It was when they recorded it, it was intentionally written in such a way that early Christians could memorize it. That early Christians could memorize it and then put it into practice, right? And a lot of, look, that's lost on us because why do you need to memorize anything? You have a Google machine in your pocket, right? Seriously, how many of you have the cell phone number of your spouse memorized? It's better than I thought, but it's still 50-50. And I bet if you went through, never mind, I'm not gonna say that. It'd be mean. I can't. So, that's not a big thing for us today, but this is a teaching that we should commit to memory. So, Jesus even says that. Chapter 7, verse 24. He's wrapping all of it up. He says this, therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. So a lot of times we use this, we take this story and we pull it out of its context. In its context, the statement that Jesus is making is huge. He's saying, this is what you should base everything you do on. If you listen to what I just said and then put it into practice, it will be a firm foundation for your life. If you do not listen to what I just said and do not put it into practice, you will die when your house falls down on top of you. See, that's the other thing about the story. A lot of times when we tell the story, it's like we leave it open-ended, or it's like, oh, you're just gonna have to rebuild your house over and over and over again in the sand. That's not how this works. It's raining, it's flooding, and your house is on sand and you're inside it. Right? So he says three things essentially here, and they're not complicated, but they are the doorway to stability. The first one is this: knowledge is required. Anyone who hears these words of mine, you have to know what he taught. If you want your life to have any stability, if you want God to be active in your life, if you want the Holy Spirit to be moving in your life, and ultimately that's the thing that brings you that unshakable nature, right? It's not like there's not a 5-step process to being unshakable. Like there's not a book, there's not a self-help book that's gonna get you there. There's plenty of them that will claim to, you'll read them and then they won't work and you'll buy a new one. It's not that. It's the thing that makes, when I think of like that unshakable nature, that stability that people have. I'm a pastor's kid and now I'm a pastor. I've been to probably 10 times the number of funerals as most of you, right? And so when I think of that unflappability, I think of typically an old man or an old woman standing at the front of a funeral home. And while everyone else is crying because their spouse died, they're hugging people. They're telling them it's okay and they're telling them they love them. Because I can't imagine how I would be if that happened to me, but I see how they are when that happened to them. And there's also, one of the reasons I think of that too is the maturity that comes with age. Like this is a process. But like that stability to get that, right? If you want to get that, you do have to know what he taught. And I think that should be self-evident, but like our culture just kind of says, hey, be a good person. Like you just be a good person and it'll be okay. Jesus actually said the opposite of that. We read it in chapter 5. He actually said the opposite of that, right? For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, meaning the Pharisees are the other big leading religious group. They are super duper pious. Like their piety reaches the level of like just think about the Amish, right? Like they live life completely different because of their religious beliefs. Right? They're super duper pious. Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. So basically what he's saying is it's impossible to be good enough. It's impossible to be good enough. And that's what our culture tells us is just be a good person and it'll be okay. And so I think that leads, especially when that seeps into our faith, that leads us to a place where like, we don't even value knowing what he said. We just try to generally follow the moral outline and be a decent person. That's crazy, dude. That's crazy. Especially, think about the presumptuous nature of that. Like you say you're a Christian, so you're taking on the name. You are a Christian, little Christ, literally like the image of the Messiah is what that would mean, right? You take on that name and you ignore what he taught. That would be like you walking up to somebody that you have a crush on. Let's go back to middle school. And then introducing yourself with their last name or as their husband. So presumptuous to the point that it's ridiculous. But that's common practice. If you want to know the easiest way to know mostly what he taught, commit the Sermon on the Mount to memory. Right? Knowledge is required. The next thing, good practice is foundational. Knowledge is required and good practice is foundational. It is the thing. Jesus says it is the thing that provides the stability. Let me get it. I hate it when it crosses 2 pages. Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man. You need both. And the practice is the thing that puts it into play, right? Like, okay, we built a house a few years ago. And when we built a house, they dug a hole out the side of a hill because my whole yard is a hill. Bad choice. But the whole yard is a hill. It's so, like I'm riding on a lawnmower like this, trying not to die. But the whole yard's a hill. They cut a square out of the hill, right? And then they poured like 8-9 foot tall, because I have a basement, 8-9 foot tall thing of concrete, right? So my house, it ain't moving because it sits on about 9 feet of buried concrete. It's like the wind can come. The act of building the foundation is the thing that makes my house safe to live in, right? And in the same way, practicing what he taught is the thing that will bring stability to your life. It is the thing that will make your life safe to participate in, spiritually speaking, right? So you need both. The problem is I think a lot of us stop before we even get to the knowledge part. And if you don't know, how are you going to put it into practice? But here's the other thing. If we don't stop there, then this is huge. It's driving me nuts. If you don't stop there, and you do actually know what he taught, right? A lot of us fail to put it into practice. A lot of us fail to put it into practice. And we then fall back on that same thing. Well, I just want to generally be a good person. That teaching's antiquated. I'm gonna not highlight that one. I'm gonna highlight this one though, because I like that one, right? And we put ourselves in God's shoes. And here's the problem. Okay, let me read it. But anyone who hears these words of mine, verse 26, anyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. Knowing without practicing, right? Knowing without practicing is dangerous. So you need to know, but you really need to practice, because if you know what he said and you don't put it into play, it's dangerous. Now, that sounds, for me, when I hear that, It's like, okay, that's a leap. Like, wouldn't it be just, even if I didn't practice it super well, wouldn't it be best, like, at least if I knew what he taught, right? Well, no, not really. Because when you know the right thing to do and you ignore doing the right thing, you create a culture in your home of ignoring God. You create a pattern in your life of ignoring God. And the worst thing you can do is know what he has to say and reject him. Right? Like as a parent, right? Like if my kid does something super stupid and wrong, but does it out of ignorance, like, I don't even, okay, this one, like, everybody who's had toddlers has probably had this experience. Your kid poops in the bathtub. Super stupid, and we can say it's wrong. Like, it's probably sinful. It's in here somewhere. Right? If that happens, we've all done it. Yeah, there you go. Hopefully not as an adult. If that happens, it's not, this isn't whatever. You know what I mean? Like, clean it up and let's move on, right? But if I know that that's dirty and that's gross, and my kid knows that that's dirty and that's gross and does it anyway because they're angry, that's worthy of punishment. You know what I'm saying? Like, knowing what he has to say and then not doing it is dangerous. Ultimately, I think that this is, I think that this is a huge problem in the church. I think that what happens for us individually, and then what can tend to happen corporately, is we just lose sight of the goal, right? And when we lose sight of the goal, we the goal being the gospel moving forward in my life, in the lives of my family, and in the lives of the people I know. That's the goal for you individually. That's the goal for the church. And when we lose sight of the goal, we just kind of meander through life, right? We just kind of, you see this in churches all the time. This is a good example, right? Because you probably, if you've gone to church for a while, you've been a part of a church that just lost sight of the goal. And all of a sudden, instead of wanting to see the gospel move forward, we're arguing over carpet color, right? Or paint color on the walls, or what the kids' curriculum is going to be. And we're infighting. We know what Jesus taught. We know what we're supposed to do, but we don't do it. And then it becomes dangerous for the community around us because we show them that we're hypocrites rather than showing them what Jesus actually looks like. In your personal life, it's the same. You can go through these periods and you lose sight of the goal and you kind of meander and you waver and you whatever and you fall into old habits, just whatever. And then your children, they're watching you, and instead of seeing you emulating Jesus, right? They see you looking a lot like you. And I don't know about you, I'd rather look like Jesus than myself because I'm not great. You know? Not awesome. Dude, if you put me in a loud room for 3 hours, I turn into a worse person. I was at a birthday party yesterday, it was loud, and by the time I got home, I was grumpy. I don't want my kids to be like me. I want them to be like Jesus. So I gotta practice what Jesus taught. So I'm gonna be more like Jesus so they can be like Jesus. And ultimately, that brings the stability I'm looking for. It doesn't mean that the storm doesn't come. I think a lot of times we want the storm not to come. I was sitting in a deer stand praying, God, can you make the storm stop? Like 2 days ago. When's it just gonna be easier? When is it just gonna be easier? Really, what I said was, when is it just gonna be better? But what I meant is, when is it just gonna be easier? Because I'm lazy, right? I'm prone to wanting it to be easy. And so we just don't experience the stability that he wants for us because we don't practice what he has for us, what he's taught for us, what he's taught us to do. And because we lose sight of the big picture.
Did you shoot a deer that day?
No. So, no, it was a nice sit in the woods. So, all right. Yeah. Can I pray with you? God, thank you. Thank you for being patient with us. And thank you for saving us. God, I thank you that you are the true king, that you're the perfect king, and that you fulfill the law so that we don't have to try. And so that we can just follow you and set our heart on you. And if we set our heart on you, you will make us better. You will move us forward, and you will give us the stability that we need. Nothing will overtake us, not because we're strong or awesome, but because we've set our hearts and our minds on you and your teaching and your instruction. Lord, I just pray that you'd make us all humble enough and wise enough to do that. Where the motivation's lacking to learn what you actually have said, give us motivation. Where the discipline is lacking to practice what you actually taught, give us discipline. Let us be your people because we do what you said, not just because we took the name, but because we do what you said. Amen.